Everyone has secrets buried deep in their family's past. But sometimes, the truth is much darker than you can ever imagine. What I found in this forgotten village changed everything I knew about my family, and it's a nightmare I can never escape. Let me take you to the beginning, where it all started. It all started with a simple letter. A yellowing piece of paper, tucked away inside an old wooden chest that hadn't been touched for years. My grandmother's death had finally given me a reason to return to this village. I had always heard stories about this place from my parents' stories of strange disappearances, haunting whispers in the wind, and above all, the mystery of my family's cursed lineage. But I never truly believed them, until now. When I arrived, the village looked much like it did in the stories remote, surrounded by dense forests that seemed to close in on it like a protective barrier. It was as if the village was hiding from the world, trapped in a time long forgotten. Houses made of old, rotting wood stood like silent sentinels, watching my every step. I reached my grandmother's house at the edge of the village, its windows covered in dust and cobwebs. As I opened the creaky door, a gust of cold air hit me, sending chills down my spine. The inside was just as I remembered, dark, filled with old furniture and faded photographs of people I barely knew. But something felt off. The house had always felt eerie, but now it felt sinister. As I explored the house, I found the chest. It was hidden in the attic, covered with dust and years of neglect. Inside, among old trinkets and forgotten memories, was the letter that changed everything. It was addressed to me, written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. The words were simple but heavy with warning. If you are reading this, it means the curse has begun again. You must find the truth about our family before it's too late. Go to the forest. Everything begins there. The next day, I headed into the forest. This was the place I had always feared as a child, where the trees were so dense that sunlight barely penetrated. As I walked deeper, the air became colder, and an unsettling silence settled over the forest. There were no birds, no animals, nothing but the sound of my footsteps on the dry leaves. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but something pulled me forward, deeper into the heart of the forest. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood an old, decrepit house. It was small, almost hidden by the overgrown vegetation, and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Around the house, the ground was bare, no grass, no plants, just dry earth. It was as if the land itself had rejected life. The windows were dark, and the door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking with the slightest breeze. I hesitated for a moment, but my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Go to the forest. Everything begins there. So, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside the house was stale, filled with the scent of decay and damp wood. Every step I took echoed through the empty rooms. But as I explored further, I began to notice something strange. Old, rotting furniture arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the main room. And then, I saw them. Bodies, sitting in the circle, frozen in time, as if waiting for something or someone. Their skin was pale, their clothes tattered, but there was no mistaking who they were. My family. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real. How could they be here, after all these years? Their bodies were perfectly preserved, as if untouched by time or decay. But something was wrong. Their faces, though familiar, were void of life, their eyes hollow, staring into nothingness. I took a step closer, trembling, and noticed something strange on their skin symbols. Strange markings carved into their flesh, glowing faintly in the dim light. They looked like runes or curses, etched deep into their bodies as if by some dark ritual. Suddenly, I heard a sound soft, almost like a whisper, coming from the walls around me. I froze, listening closely. The whisper grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It felt as though the house itself was alive, speaking to me, warning me. As I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the room, there was a figure tall, dark, with glowing red eyes staring at me from the shadows. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew it was watching me. I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could through the forest, back to the village, not stopping until I reached the safety of my grandmother's house. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The bodies of my family, the strange symbols, the figure in the shadows. It all pointed to one thing. The curse was real, and now it was coming for me. I stepped back slowly, my breathing quickening, my chest tight. How could this be? They, my family, who had been missing for years, were now in front of me. But something seemed different about them. Their eyes, once vacant, now seemed to follow my every move with an eerie focus. My body trembled as I tried to grasp what was happening. I tried to recall every detail, searching for some logical explanation, but my thoughts spiraled without direction. What had happened to them? Why were they here? And how could they look so alive? As I examined them more closely, I noticed something strange. On their hands were fresh scars, forming peculiar patterns, as if someone had carved symbols into their skin. These symbols resembled spells or curses. When I tried to approach, my steps were halted by a sound. It came from the walls, a soft whisper calling my name. I knew you'd return. Child, come back. The voice didn't belong to my family. It was another voice, deeper, colder, reverberating throughout the room. Without realizing it, I turned toward the wall. There, hidden beneath moss and dust, was an ancient painting. It depicted a family sitting in a circle, eerily resembling the exact position my family was in now. But what froze my blood was that the faces in the painting began to morph, slowly turning into grotesque and twisted versions of themselves. It dawned on me then, my family hadn't died naturally. They had been sacrificed, and somehow I was tied to it all. My feet felt heavy as I tried to leave the room. The whispers from the walls grew louder, more menacing. My steps faltered when I saw shadows moving in the corners of the room. The shadows inched closer, forming into a tall figure with glowing red eyes. I couldn't move. The figure stood right in front of me, staring at me with an intensity that pierced through my soul. Then, without a sound, it raised its long, pale arm, frozen in their positions in the center of the room. I followed its gaze and noticed something new. The ground around my family began to glow faintly, a large circle etched into the floor now emitting a sinister red light. It wasn't just any circle. It was a death mark. A ritual. I stepped back, trying to comprehend what was happening. Everything felt like a never-ending nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. It was real, too real. The shadowy figure began to fade, leaving behind an icy coldness that seeped into the room. One thought continued to echo in my mind: my family had been cursed. And now, the curse was coming for me too. I had to find a way to stop this. But how? How could I fight something so ancient, so powerful? I fled the room in a panic, racing up the stairs and back to the surface. As I burst through the old wooden door, the night had fallen. The cold wind whipped at my face, making me painfully aware that what I had seen wasn't a figment of my imagination. The forest around me felt darker than usual, as if the entire land could feel the presence of the evil lurking within. I knew I couldn't face this alone. The next morning, I decided to seek out a village elder, someone I had heard kept many of the village's dark secrets. His name was Mr. Sudirman, an old man who lived on the outskirts of the village, far from the rest of the townspeople. They said he knew much about the village's history and the dark truths no one else dared speak of. As I approached his house, I felt the weight of fear pressing down on me. Mr. Sudirman greeted me with a weary look, as if he had been expecting me. He invited me inside, and I wasted no time explaining everything I had seen. He listened in silence, occasionally nodding, as if the horrors I described were nothing new to him. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long time before speaking. Your family's curse is older than this village itself. It began with your ancestors, people who made deals with forces beyond our understanding. These forces granted them power, wealth, but at a terrible cost. Each generation, one member of the family must be sacrificed to fulfill the pact. That's why your family disappeared. They were the chosen ones. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected something like this, but hearing it spoken aloud was almost too much to bear. Is there any way to stop it? I asked, desperate for a solution. The old man sighed deeply. There is a way, but it's dangerous. The ritual that binds your family to this curse was performed in the heart of the forest, at an ancient altar. To break the curse, you must go there, confront the spirits of those who made the pact, and destroy the altar. But be warned, once you enter the heart of the forest, there is no turning back. My heart raced as I considered his words. The idea of venturing back into that cursed forest terrified me, but what choice did I have? If I didn't do this, the curse would continue, and eventually, it would claim me too. That night, I prepared myself for the journey. I packed what little I thought I would need: water, a flashlight, and a knife, though I doubted it would be much use against whatever awaited me in the forest. As I stepped outside, the wind howled through the trees, almost as if the forest was calling to me, beckoning me to enter its depths. I walked for hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. The further I went, the more the air grew thick with an unholy presence. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like twisted hands. The ground beneath my feet felt soft, almost as if it were alive, pulsing with dark energy. And then, I found it. A clearing, just like Mr. Suderman had described. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in strange symbols similar to the ones I had seen carved into my family's skin. The air around the altar felt heavy, suffocating. It was as if the very atmosphere was alive with malevolent energy. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stood before the altar, I could feel the weight of countless generations pressing down on me. The spirits of my ancestors were here, watching, waiting for me to make my move. And then, the voices began. Whispers, low and menacing, filled the air around me. I couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. They were angry, vengeful. They wanted me to suffer for the sins of my ancestors. Suddenly, the ground around the altar began to tremble. The whispers grew louder, and from the shadows, I saw them figures, ghostly and pale, emerging from the trees. They were my family, or what was left of them. Their faces were twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and lifeless. They reached out toward me, their hands clawing at the air. "You cannot break the curse," a voice hissed from behind me. I spun around and saw it, the tall figure with the red eyes, standing just a few feet away. It was the same figure I had seen before, but now, in the dim light of the clearing, I could see it more clearly. Its face was shrouded in darkness, but its eyes burned with a terrible fire. The letters I found inside the wooden box felt fragile in my hands. Each page was filled with my father's handwriting, but as I read further, his writing became more erratic, as if he had written them in a state of panic. I sat on the floor of the room, under the dim light, and began to read. To my child. The first words were written. My hands trembled as I continued. If you are reading this, it means something terrible has happened. This curse, the curse that has haunted our village for centuries, has now befallen our family. Our family wasn't chosen randomly. There is a reason why we were chosen, and that's because of the mistakes of our ancestors. I paused for a moment, trying to digest what my father meant. Mistakes of our ancestors. What had my family done to cause this? Our ancestors were involved in dark rituals that were once performed to gain control over the power of this forest. They made a pact with the dark spirits of the forest, hoping to gain wealth and power. But they broke their promise, and now the spirits demand their due. Since then, every few generations, our family is sacrificed. No one can stop them, unless you find a way to break the pact. My heart raced. My father knew about all of this, yet he never told me. Why did they stay in this village? Why didn't they leave? I tried to find the answer, but my time ran out. If you want to survive, you must do something I couldn't do. You have to return to where it all began. Deep in the forest, there is an ancient altar where our ancestors made the pact. That's where you can break this curse, but remember, the risk is great. If you fail, the spirits will claim your life as well. My hands shook as I closed the letter. Everything was starting to make sense why my family became victims, why this village was filled with an aura of death, and why I felt more involved than I ever wanted to be. But there was still something unanswered. How exactly could I break the pact? What did I have to do at the ancient altar? And was I truly ready to face the spirits waiting there? That night, I decided to do what my father's letter instructed. I had to go deep into the forest and find the ancient altar. This might be my only chance to break the curse that has haunted my family for centuries. The forest behind the house looked darker than usual. The night air felt heavier, full of a silence that was unnerving. As I walked deeper, a strong wind blew, carrying faint whispers from all directions, as if the forest itself was alive, watching me. After walking for hours, I reached the place mentioned in my father's letter. There, hidden behind giant trees, I saw a large stone altar, covered in moss. Around the altar, the ground was barren, as if no life could grow there. The altar was decorated with ancient symbols, similar to the ones I had seen on my family's bodies. In the center of the altar was a shallow depression, likely used to hold the blood of sacrifices. I swallowed hard, feeling sick imagining how many victims had been slaughtered there. But something strange caught my eye. Near the altar, there was a statue almost hidden by the tree roots. The statue depicted a human figure with a blurred face, but in its hand, the statue held an object that looked like a knife. An ancient knife, likely used in every sacrificial ritual. I stepped closer and picked up the knife. The moment my hand touched it, I felt a cold sensation running through my entire body. And that's when I heard the voice again, the voice that had haunted me since I first entered this forest. You have come here. The voice was distant but clear. But are you ready to pay the price to save yourself? I froze, trying to understand what the voice meant. A price? What did I have to pay? Then, suddenly, a large shadow appeared in front of the altar. The shadow moved without a sound, slowly approaching until it transformed into the same tall figure with glowing red eyes. To break this pact, the voice said, a life must be given. You came here to save your family, but whose life will you sacrifice? I was stunned. I hadn't expected this. The curse could be broken, but only by sacrificing a life. And I had to choose. I knew what I had to do, but was I really ready to sacrifice myself to end this curse? The atmosphere around the altar grew even more tense. The whispers from the forest became louder, as if the spirits trapped there were waiting for my decision. I looked at the knife in my hand, realizing that this was the end of everything. This was the moment where I had to make a choice. Would I sacrifice myself to save my family and stop the curse, or would I let it continue and leave this village with my life intact? The shadow in front of the altar moved closer, forming into a more tangible shape. Its red eyes glowed in the darkness, emitting an aura of inevitable death. The voice spoke again, this time more forcefully and urgent. Your decision must be quick. These spirits will not wait much longer. I knew that if I didn't do something, the curse would continue, and perhaps I would become the next victim. But was I really willing to give up my life? I thought about my family, the lives lost, and the centuries of suffering caused by this dark pact. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I raised the ancient knife above the altar, ready to strike. The figure with the glowing eyes watched closely, as if waiting for my final action. My hands trembled, but I steadied myself. This was the only way to end it all. With one swift motion, I brought the knife down. They say the curse is broken. But at what cost? In the end, some secrets are better left buried. And now, as the forest falls silent once more, my family can finally rest in peace. And me, I must continue walking, carrying the memory of what I've done, a memory of my family, and the truth that will be forever buried in this forest.